Well, good to see all of you. I'm Joe Rigney, and today, in lieu of our normal chapel, we're going to have a relationship forum, and it's my privilege to moderate it. We're going to be talking about issues that some of you have submitted questions, and we're grateful for that. And so we'll be posing some of those to our panel here. I'll introduce them in a moment. But we want to talk about issues related to dating, to friendships, to how do men and women relate to each other, how do single men and single women, how do married men and married women, married men and single women, all the different combinations that we can have. We want to talk about those issues and try to give some guidance in how we at least think we can walk in wisdom and love toward one another in a way that guards purity and pursues holiness. So, with that, let me introduce our panel here. To my right, Ryan Griffith, professor in our Christian Worldview program. I'm sure most of you know him. Jamie Carlson, not sure how many of you know Jamie, but Jamie oversees Bethlehem College and Seminary Press. And does great work there. She's married to Michael, and they have a little girl, Liesel, out in the back, and really glad that Jamie agreed to be on the panel. And then Zach and Betsy Howard, who I trust most of you probably know as well. Zach's our director of admissions, and Betsy teaches in the Christian Worldview program and the History of Ideas as well. So grateful that all of them were willing to sit up here, and so we're going to be asking some questions. It'll be somewhat of a conversation, and hope that it's beneficial to all of you. So, relationship forum, dating, friendship, start with definitions. That's a good Bethlehem thing to do. So anybody want to take a stab at defining, when we talk about can men and women be friends, or can men and women just be friends, what are friends? What does it mean to be a friend? What is friendship?
I guess everyone's looking at me. I would say that friendship... Well, I'm going to give a couple of other people to talk about friendship. Lewis in The Four Loves talks about friendship as two people standing side by side, looking at the same thing and loving that thing and pursuing that thing together. And I think that's a helpful place to begin. And what he says, you know you're a friend with that person when you're looking at that thing and you see it, and then you look at them and go, you too? You love that too? And that moment is, I think, the spark of friendship. That's where it begins. When you're able to say, oh, you love Coldplay too, or you love Greek aspect theory too, like, whoa, you must be someone I want to get to know. So I think that's where the spark of friendship begins. And what Lewis says that's helpful is that happens in the matrix of companionship. And we're going to go into whether or not this is a good way to think about it, but this is what Lewis says. He says that companionship is what we have when we're pursuing that thing together, and friendship is going beyond just basic companionship in that. It's that moment where you go, oh, you too. So companionship is going at it together. Friendship is where you step even beyond that and love it together. So I think that's a good place to start. You guys want to jump in?
Yeah, one way that I think about it that's been helpful for me is, even as we look at examples that we have in the Bible of friendships, we can kind of see three different kinds of friendship. There's a friendship that is largely association. So I think about, maybe for an example of, a friendship, you work downtown at Target, you get to know your coworkers, but they're not going to be the person that you call when your car breaks down immediately. So there's friendship that's just really based on association. The second maybe type of friendship would be a friendship that is association plus loyalty, right? This idea, for example, in the Old Testament, think about the way that kings were friends with other kings. They didn't go watch football together, but they had more than just an association. There were relationships of loyalty such that when one king was in trouble, he would assist another. The third level would be friendship as association plus loyalty plus affection. So you can think about examples of that in male-male friendships and female-female friendships in the Old Testament, like Naomi and Ruth, or Jonathan and David. So there's, in those close friendships, those examples that we have in Scripture of close friendships, we see those three components, association plus loyalty plus affection.
Okay, so it sounds like in both of those, there's some level of so companionship or your associational common activity, and then something beyond that that includes common activity, but then is also some kind of loyalty plus affection or shared you two. And I think one of the things with Lewis is that he acknowledges in the Four Loves is his notion of friendship is shaped largely by the fact that he's a man. He says, I don't know what women-to-women friendships are like. I've never had one. And so his experience of friendship is largely born out of a masculine experience. So maybe that's the second question is, do you think that, do men and women form friendships for the same reasons but for the same motives, for the same goals? Or are there differences that we ought to keep in mind? Maybe not in a nice box, all women fit in this box and all men fit in this box, but kind of general tendency. So we need to say that because if we start talking, if we answer this question and we say men do this and you're a gal and you go, well, I do that, that's not a problem. It's bell curve, it's generalizations, it's tendencies. If you put 100 women and you tried to see percentages, something like that. So do you think, are there things that men and women are after in friendships that differ? And if so, what might those be?
Well, I think maybe before we talk about the ways that they differ, men and women, a helpful counterpoint to just Ryan Griffith gave us this kind of friendship, add this, so a summative or this cumulative kind of friendship ending with this romantic love. We could look potentially at the object that we're looking at that will potentially help the kind of friendship, male or female. Lewis is taking a page out of Aristotle's Ethics as well as being informed by Scripture. So if we have Ryan meet Zach and throw some Aristotle in here in terms of hierarchies or the kinds of things we're looking at. In his Ethics, Aristotle's going to tell us that the kind of thing we're looking at, and we turn it to our side and go, you too, is going to have an impact on the kind of friendship it's going to be, which will help distinguish the second question, namely, do men look at things or form friendships for different reasons than females? So what kind of things are they, I think Aristotle's phrase is, going about in their daily life? So if it's a frisbee relationship, namely you're chasing plastic in the grass, it's a pretty low form of friendship. Really fun.
Says you.
Says.
Versus beholding something like Christ displayed on the cross, taking the wrath of the Father to saving the human race. When you look at that and your heart stirs in the way that Zach's heart stirs when he's playing frisbee, that's a different kind of like, wow, you two. The closeness of that friendship is going to look different than the frisbee throwing friendship or the mom's club. We all happen to have kids between the ages of 6 and 12 months, so we're all on the playground. It's not because we have a great affection for swings, but we find ourselves here, and so we would legitimately call those things friendships. So I think it's helpful as we think about categories of friendships to distinguish between the ends that we're pursuing. So that may help us. What are men and women doing? Here we're complementarian, so the tasks that women and men do in the church and in the home are different. So that will help us distinguish what kind of friendships we're going to have.
That is helpful to think about that shared activity that forms the matrix in which that deeper level of friendship or loyalty, affection, community is around, is going to shape just the nature. It's going to be the atmosphere in which the friendship breathes. Here's the kind of thing I had in mind in asking about do men and women. It's mainly born out of personal experience, and I'm wondering if it's at all generalizable. When I think back to growing up, it seems to me that when I was thinking about pursuing friends with other guys, that I was after something different than when I would pursue a friendship with a girl. And it tended to be something like, with men, often it was shared activity, competition, it's the chase and the frisbees, or even at a deeper level, things like the gospel, but it tended, the form the friendship took often was very, competitive, or there was arguing about theology was the matrix in which the bond was formed, something like that. Whereas when I tended to form friendships with women, it tended to involve a level of vulnerability or an intimacy or a desire for emotional support that wasn't always, it felt different. And in my case, it felt like the friendships with women were always on that kind of summit on the way up for, this is kind of on the way to dating, on the way to marriage. As opposed to with the guys where it was more around that common activity and the friendship emerges there. And so I'm wondering, is that distinction between why I'm forming friendship with other men versus why I'm forming friendship with this woman or these women or whatever, is that generalized? Is that something that's common to men and women, or do women form friendships differently? It's a question, I guess. Jamie, you want to chime in there?
I'm processing. I'm wondering, I think it's very likely that that could be the case, but I'm not sure that I would say it with a lot of confidence.
Okay.
I'm wondering if maybe it has more, that difference has more to do with the at which point you would say that you're friends with people. So a man might say, okay, I just went and played Frisbee with somebody, now we're friends.
Right.
But if a guy was to play Frisbee with a woman, maybe he wouldn't say we're friends. Maybe it would need to get to that emotional level.
Interesting,
And
yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's maybe the difference, because I'm hesitant to say that men and women necessarily
Form friendships differently.
make friendships
Okay.
differently.
You guys have any thoughts on?
Well, I still think that I would want to say within that, there's going to be part of the reason there's so much confusion, I think, in talking about friendships and in talking about friendships, can guys and girls be friends, is because not every guy thinks the same way, not every girl thinks the same way as
Right.
it relates to friendships.
Yeah.
And so I want to be careful, generalizing too much, because there are plenty of more, maybe they would be called more sensitive guys that have a more sensitive kind of constitution.
Yeah.
That friendship really does mean I want to share my heart with this person. I want this person to help me think through the issues.
Whether
that I'm
they're a
working
guy or
through.
whether they're a girl, it's
Yeah.
the same. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess I certainly think that for guys generally, the way that we build friendships is around common interests. But that may be at that level of, if I want to use that breakdown that I did,
Yeah.
that may be the level of association where there's
Right.
not much beyond that. It's almost like an acquaintance kind of thing.
Right, but it does show that that issue of definition of what do we mean by can men and women be friends there's a whole host of factors, and that because it's not clear enough on the front end, that different people might be after different things in the friendship.
Yep.
Association, loyalty, camaraderie, and fun versus emotional support, maybe potential romantic attraction down the road, that's where the kind of confusion comes. You say something?
I was just say there seems to be two spectrums we're talking about. Betsy's a spectrum of pursuit, so the difference in what we're pursuing will influence what the relationship's like. But also there's a spectrum in personality. Who we are will influence when we say, oh yeah, I'm a friend with that person or not. If we're very, maybe more introverted, or just we're reticent to identify with someone to say, oh yeah, that person and me, we're together on this. If we're more reticent, that personality spectrum and that pursuit spectrum is going to influence how we say, oh, that's a friend of mine, that's not a friend of mine.
So, okay, so build on this. So if we say, maybe if we use terminology like best friend, by which we mean something like a deeper level, so not at that companionship level, but a deeper level of allegiance, loyalty, deeper level of affection. There's a one-on-one component of something like that, where there's the activities are not common and shared with lots of people, but it's just us. Should men and women pursue that kind of friendship with each other? Should men and women be best friends? And maybe we'll take it in turns, singles, and then marrieds, either with other married people of the opposite sex or singles. So start with singles. Actually, let's start with marriage. It's probably an easier question. Should should men and
Should be
women?
best friends.
Yes, they should.
Short answer.
But should men have that kind of friendship with women who aren't their wives?
So I think Zach's question on personality is potentially a helpful place to answer this one. Namely, it's first, before we ask, can the guy be best friends with women when he's married, it might be wise for him to stop and just think, how many, given my personality, the disposition God's given me, the time and resources I have, how many friends, period, can I have that are this level that you're talking about? We're talking like 5, 4, maybe some of you are incredibly extroverted, 10. I don't know how many people you can be that close with, just given the human limitations. And so when you start to think about the few numbers, statistically, so if you have 4 of these friendships, one is your spouse perhaps, you're down to 3 that are these people, right. Jonathan and David-like friendships. So the question that we're asking is, should we give someone of the opposite sex that privilege of place? That's what we're asking?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer for a married couple is, so I'm answering for a married couple.
Yes,
This is always a good
answer
idea,
for
right? Yeah, because I know everything about marriage. Is no. I mean,
right.
A man should not have a best friend of the opposite sex who's not his wife.
Right.
And I think for a single person to have a woman who's a best friend is dangerous, in the sense that both for him and for her, if there's not a real clear understanding of the romantic component of that, right? I think that men are going to be most benefited, single men are going to be most benefited, single women are going to be most benefited by having close, dear friends of the same gender who can help them as they parse their relationships with other people. And so having someone that they're vulnerable with, I think, is absolutely vital. But I don't think that that person should be a person of the opposite gender unless unless you're moving towards marriage, unless you're dating, right? Maybe I moved out of the category too quick. But
that's good.
There you go.
I was just going to make the distinction between what you were saying about the one-on-one component and couple to couple, because I also think it's very important for there to be really deep, solid couple relationships. So, for example, I'd say that Zach is my friend, but mostly because I'm friends with Betsy. So, sorry, Zach.
Most of Zach's friends are like that.
But, yeah, but I mean, I just mean that there are a lot of details that Zach might know about my life that are deep and intimate, but it's not because I'm calling Zach up and sharing my heart, it's because I'm sharing my heart with Betsy, and they as a couple are praying for me, or me and my husband, or whatever the case may be. And in that sense, there's a lot of intimacy that can be shared, but it's through the filter of my female friend, Betsy.
And if we were to say that conversely, then Holly Stratton, is that? Friend of Andy Naselli's, I'll get the pronunciation later. The way that she has helpfully said it is that when you are either the man looking in at a girl friendship, so Zach's friendship with Jamie or my friendship with Michael, her husband, making sure that you are a friend of their marriage. So my friendship with Michael I would describe as like, a friendship with the Carlson marriage. And so seeking the good of Jamie and Michael being drawn together, build up, edified. I am friends with Michael to the degree that it edifies Jamie and Michael and Jamie. And then Michael as another brother in Christ, to use a term that I'm sure we're gonna.
Yeah, so that was the next place I was going to go is, we talk this way about we want to treat members of the opposite sex as brothers in Christ or as sisters in Christ. But what does that actually mean? Like, what does it mean to? So now maybe go back to the unmarrieds. For a single guy to treat a single girl as a sister in Christ, and vice versa. What does that include? What does that involve? Or and maybe what doesn't involve? Like, so this is coming from the Bible. The Bible tells us to do this, but what does it mean?
Well, maybe if I can just tag one thing onto the previous thing and say, as a single man for many years, I have been so deeply helped and encouraged by married couples, having married friends. So leading a small group with Jamie and Michael was a huge benefit to me in the last several years. Knowing the Rigneys and the Tabs, and so all that is to say, I think it's vital for people who are unmarried to have married friends and to be friends with the couple. Yeah. And to benefit, like I've benefited a ton from Jenny over the years. So that being said, as it relates to what does Paul mean when Paul says to Timothy, treat younger women as sisters? Don't forget the last part, right? In all purity. Right. So my understanding of what Paul's arguing for there for Timothy is that he's to treat younger women as not in such a way as they're not to be considered potential marriage partners in that sense. So in all purity, I think when we're talking about treating a woman as a sister, what I think he's meaning is not as a potential marriage partner, right? So what might that look like, or what might that not look like? I certainly think it does look like a certain kind of kindness, a certain kind of desiring to help when appropriate and necessary. I think it does. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of young men caring for the protection of other women younger women coming to their defense. But in terms of being an emotional a confidant or being an emotional support or having a deep relationship in that kind of sense, I think that's not what it would look like for us to treat, for single men to treat single women as sisters.
So how does that work if we're supposed to treat single women, if a single guy is supposed to treat single women as sisters, and yet one of them might be his wife? Is that why it's important to, it seems like that's part of why it's treat them like sisters,
Right.
but they're not sisters because they are potential spouses,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So what are some of the ways that the sibling relationship doesn't carry across into the generic relationship? Are there particular things you guys have in mind?
So the parts that would probably transfer into the marriage relationship are the parts that may be excluded. So for example, my brother, if he left his laptop in the library and I walked by, I might take it and hide it on the other side. As a sister, send a teasing text, tell him go find his laptop or whatever. That kind of tease, or I don't know, the sort of spunkiness that's in a sibling relationship, or you're hollering down the stairs racing to get the last Lucky Charms because mom won't buy another box till next Christmas. Those are the things that siblings hold in common. And you're not going to
Grown
hip
siblings?
check.
I mean, is this something? Is this like last Christmas?
Well, we didn't. My mom won't buy Lucky Charms ever. Maybe we'll watch this and buy Lucky Charms this year.
Okay.
But in any case, that sort of rambunctiousness or liveliness that attends a sibling relationship that perhaps oughtn't attend the relationship between a guy and a girl when they are seeking to act like unto a sister. So that seems to be one of the things that would be excluded.
So, and it seems like part of that reason is that kind of rambunctiousness, good word, between siblings is protected by the fact that they are biological siblings, and thus there's no romantic possibility here. Whereas with just somebody, a sister in Christ, that rambunctiousness looks much more like flirting, which is on its way to some kind of romantic. And so it means something different because there's not the biological connection.
Which doesn't mean that there's nothing one can do. I mean, you think of all the other helpful things. You talked about defense, physical, like, hey, let me walk you to your car. We are in inner city Minneapolis. There are, however, lots of other things that siblings do for each other, like defend one's name, the family pride, like Peters stay together. And so if someone's picking on your little brother, hey, leave him alone. This my little brother, the Three Billy Goats gruff style, which tends to destroy gossip in the church when we're looking out for one another. Like, don't say that about Jamie. She's my friend. She's my sister in Christ. So that is really edifying in terms of how the sibling dynamic builds up the body when you're looking out for the interests of one another to defend their name. That's the kind of sibling role that seems really positive between guys and girls.
I'm just thinking, I think you're absolutely right, and I want to just caution against taking either of those too far.
Oh, sure.
First, it doesn't mean that you can't have fun with your friends of the opposite gender. You can still have fun. You just have to, there's just some caution there. And secondly, I think it's good as siblings to call each other out on sin, but there are limits there too for friends of opposite genders.
Right.
It's not necessarily your role as a friend to be watching over your, like, it just would be inappropriate, I think, for me to call Zach or any of my other guy friends out on sins in a certain way, or I have, this is an unformed thought in my mind, so I'm just kind of thinking on my feet, but it's just something to be cautious about, I think, too.
Right.
There is an appropriate kind of care for a brother or sister in Christ that doesn't push over into the area of being more vulnerable than one ought to be with a person that they're not married to. Opposite. Yeah.
I think one of the other things, I don't know if you can go there, but the exclusivity part of a romantic relationship that doesn't happen in a brother and sister relationship. So if you wouldn't be willing to do the sorts of things with one brother or sister in Christ, and if you're not willing to do that to all of your other brothers and sisters in Christ, you wouldn't do it for the one. So the exclusive part of, like, I would treat my siblings the same way. I have a lot of them, so of my 6 sisters, I'll treat them all the same way. That sort of brother-sister relationship is going to be true when you're talking about brothers and sisters in Christ.
And to the degree that you're singling out, you're often expressing something more like this friendship, as it is in my mind at least, moving potentially towards something more romantic.
Right. So if Zach lets the door slam in the face of 20 girls who go by, we're sophomores in college, and Betsy walks out the door, and it's the only door he holds. He's giving Betsy more attention than the rest. However, if Zach generally opens the doors to the other 20 girls, and I also get the door open, I, on the flip side, need to be careful not to read that as, he opened the door for me, and he did for the other 20. So
Right.
those paying attention to what is happening around you is helpful in interpreting,
Right.
is the attention I'm getting what he gives, quote, all the other sisters in Christ? If so, it's not special. And that's good for you to realize, and vice versa. Am I giving her special attention, or am I giving her the attention that I, quote, give all the other sisters in Christ?
Good. So that's helpful. Let's move into some of these questions about dating. So these are just kind of these are some that came up from the box, and so I'm going to kind of work through just a couple of them. So this is no particular order, but one of the issues is if a guy expresses interest in a young woman, and she's not interested. One of the things that often in that moment is so difficult is she does care about him as a brother, and she doesn't want to hurt his feelings. So how do you decline an invitation if you're not interested in pursuing a romantic relationship? How do you decline an invitation in a way that doesn't hurt his feelings?
Well, you're going to probably have a hard time avoiding hurting his feelings. And especially for a really sensitive person, his feelings are going to be hurt. That's okay, right? That's what he got into it for. He asked you, I mean, he didn't get into it to have his feelings hurt, but he knew that he's taking a risk.
He took a risk
in asking you out. So women should feel no responsibility over the disappointment or discouragement of a guy who they turn down. And if he asks for a reason, you don't need to feel like you've got to give it at the moment.
Well, and I think that's important because I think, and this is something for guys, she doesn't have to give you a reason. Like, she can simply say no and leave it at that because, and the reason she might not want to tell you is she doesn't want to hurt your feelings.
You might not want to know.
You might not want to know.
What are you asking for anyway?
Yeah, and so to put pressure in that way is a step beyond. You don't have the right to know. She has the right to say no, and you don't have the right to necessarily push beyond that and demand explanations. And to do so is to put her in a very compromised and awkward and harmful position.
It's important, though, as well, I think, for after a woman declines an invitation, to not give the man the cold shoulder. See him walking,
like he did something wrong.
Hold my Bible up. I'm not going to talk to him. He's on the other side of church, and he's going to stay as far over there as possible. Don't make your interaction be frosty.
Right.
And at the same time, in the same way that your yes be yes and your no be no,
Yeah.
don't be hanging out wait till everyone else, you're the last two in the library and he's going to walk you to your car. So being gracious is insensitive to the fact that you did just say no, so don't make it additionally complicated for him to feel like now I have to hold up the conversation or extended periods of time.
When I think, whenever when I was in college and there was a friend of mine who I was expressing interest in, and when she declined, one of the things that in hindsight was really helpful is that she didn't treat me as though I'd done something wrong, right? Which is what a guy fears, is that now I'm going to be a pariah, I'm going to be an outcast, there's going to be a cold shoulder, there's going to be the whispering. And she treated me with a kind of dignity, and she honored the fact that I took the risk and that I thought she was worth it. Right? So she was able to communicate with me in such a way that she didn't take ownership of my hurt feelings, and I was hurt, and didn't succumb to any, at the time, much to my shame, I think, I imbibed, probably not directly from the courtly love tradition, but the same sort of mopiness that you read about in, sort of late medieval poetry, the pining and the longing and the long faces because, you have, and now, here I am, 15 years later teaching that stuff, and I'm just appalled because it makes me cringe to read courtly love poetry because I know that it's so bad. So she didn't take ownership. The pining and the long face and the sadness, she was perfectly content to let me hurt. That's okay. That's what God's for. That's what my friends, my male friends were for, is to help pick up the pieces. It's not her job. But at the same time, she didn't push me away and make me feel like I'd done something wrong or I was an outcast. And I think, so for you ladies to try to think in those terms, and then for guys, not to try to do the manipulative pining. Like, if I just show her how hurt I am, then she'll come around. Well, if she did, I'd be counseling her, you shouldn't do that, right? I'd be telling her, don't come around because he's so hurt and mopey, right? You don't want to be with a guy who's going to mope his way into your affections.
And just to say one more thing on that, what you just said, that's what your friends are for, and that's what God is for. Like that's not trite at all.
Right.
Because there's a sense of self-assessment when that happens.
Yeah.
Am I feeling a disproportionate grief
Right.
over this rejection? And why is that? Like, what was I hoping for in this? It's great to want to be married. That's a wonderful thing. Or it's great to want to get to know a girl in a dating relationship. That's a wonderful thing. But our hearts are idol factories. And so in those moments to say, what am I feeling right now? And figuring out what that might be springing from.
I just want to jump into and say that's actually a really valuable gauge, I think, for friendships also, is if you're feeling that your heart is overly sensitive to disappointment on one level or another with a friendship with the other gender, that's a really helpful gauge to understand, is this a healthy friendship, or do we need to take a step back?
That's good.
It's probably a helpful gauge for all
yeah.
friendships.
Right,
Whenever
exactly.
you crave someone's approval or affirmation, be it like, oh, they were only really my friend, or oh, will they reject that gauge is always a very helpful one on the heart.
Which is also probably helps us understand what friendships are for. They're not simply for self-satisfaction.
Right.
I mean, if that's what you think friendship is, then you're going to be disappointed, and every single time. If it's always the thing with which you're pursuing that friendship's helping you for, and ultimately, what we're pursuing is Christ. So if your friendship, whether it's a girl or a guy, it's your relationship, if that's not ultimately what it's leading you to, then you've got to check your expectations and the purposes you're pursuing that friendship.
That's good.
Can I add one more
Yeah.
little?
Yeah.
Just that continues then on into a dating relationship in marriage, because when you do, so if we have, Lewis describes friendships as side by side pursuing the object and face to face, that's what romantic affection does, it turns us toward one another. There's always the tendency to suddenly, you two, and then, and off you do is running straight toward each other and not making forward progress. So you have to, I can't use my hands and do this and hold the mic, to make sure that your object is still toward Christ and you haven't suddenly sidetracked and the longing is only for the beloved.
That's good.
So.
Does a girl have to wait for a guy to ask her out? In other words, are there appropriate ways for her to communicate interest and availability?
I didn't know that my husband was interested till the day before he asked me out, and I was not interested at the time, so I'm the worst person to ask, probably.
Does
So-
that mean I have to answer?
Sorry.
No. I can't.
So I don't think, so I'll say what I think.
Yeah. Tell us what you think about the girls,
About girls,
making
yeah,
themselves
exactly.
available.
Speaking as a guy, I don't think, I mean, I'm all for chivalry. I think chivalry is a good thing, provided it's biblically shaped, not Romance of Tristan shaped. And I do think it's important, especially it seems in our culture where there's a tendency, I think it's not just our culture, I think it's a tendency of men to be passive. I think it's important for guys to ask girls out. But at the same time, I'm also aware that there are lots of guys out there who are sometimes really clueless. And they need a little help.
I've met some of them.
Yeah, you know some of them
Yeah,
pretty well.
I
in
know
fact.
some. Yeah.
So
Some of my best friends.
I think I think it's okay for women to indicate that there is interest there. And one way I think that is a wise way of doing that is women hopefully have good married friends and have good older friends. And one way to kind of help a clueless guy see that you're interested is maybe talking with them a little bit and saying, hey, I'm interested in this guy, and I think I'm communicating it somewhat clearly, but he's totally out of it.
Right. So one author describes this as the if a guy is a hunter and she's the deer, this is shaking the bushes.
Yeah.
So it's okay to shake the bushes.
Yeah. Or have somebody else shake the bushes. Yeah,
Or
exactly.
have somebody else shake the
Yeah,
bushes. An
yeah,
older
exactly.
deer. An
Yeah.
older deer should
I
shake the
just think
bushes.
that analogy
Okay.
doesn't work very well.
Okay.
You're gonna shoot her and kill her.
And then-
But, okay.
Pursuit.
Pursuit.
Come on.
Oh,
That's the idea.
Pursuit.
Any thoughts on what's the difference though between? I think you're right. I think it's for a woman to communicate interest and availability, which is not the same as initiating or pursuing. Right? She's making herself available. She's not being closed. She's being open to relationships. What's the difference? How do you discern when that crosses a line to something like a wrong kind of flirtatiousness? And not that there may be an appropriate kind of flirtatiousness, but there's a kind of flirtatiousness that's wrong. So what's the difference between those two?
I think you need to think about two things. We already talked about a spectrum of personality. So people who have different personalities will probably do things that seem more flirtatious than others. So first thing is to consider what sort of personality do I have, and how does that usually get communicated to other people. And the second thing I think you really have to think about is what's your motive. So given that people have different personalities and they can behave differently, your motive and what you do matters a lot on whether or not it's flirtatious. So someone can do the same thing. So two different people do the same thing, and it means something totally different to the one than it does to the other. And so whenever asking the question, what's the line, this is flirtatious and this is not, it's not as bright and as clear as we might first think.
Right, so if we go back to the perhaps curious metaphor of shaking bushes, what that looks like for a single individual may look really differently. So in college, for example, at our undergraduate institution, the term Hills dating was thrown around a lot. We went to Hillsdale, and Hills dating was you spent a disproportionate amount of time together, and you were basically dating, but you weren't. And so I didn't study with guys. I had a lot of girlfriends, didn't have any reason to go ahead and study with a guy. And so if I had suddenly, to try to show that I was available, Zach sitting at a table by himself, if I had to plot my books down, that would have been flirtatious in the way that I spoke and acted with other people. If, however, we were at a dinner table, Hillsdale had these big circular tables, you eat all your meal cafeteria style, and Zach's there with a whole bunch of friends and we stay, and then Zach stays and I stay and we keep chatting, maybe about our class or a lecture, that would have been something where I could have communicated, oh, look, we're having an interesting conversation and I'm enjoying your company, but I didn't go, like, hi,
right.
You're studying me too. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is dispositionally
Although you did that
based.
you did a really good impression right there of what that would have been. So
I actually, like Jamie, I spent the entire week before Zach asked me out staying out of his way because I wasn't sure if he was interested and I wanted to make it really clear that he wanted to find me. So I worked really hard to stay out of his way.
So-
But
so
that's
She was not shaking the
no,
bushes.
there was no bushes.
so yeah, neither. I guess it's just not our disposition. But in any case, so yeah,
Well,
personality is an
And it seems like one of the things would be is on the motive question is to what degree is it simply either male attention or female attention in general that you're after? It's not any that this person has caught my eye and I might be interested in a relationship. It's much more like I just crave attention from the opposite sex, and therefore my demeanor towards all of them is designed to draw as much attention as I can. And there's something in terms of self-examination in the soul that you need to be wary of at that level, which is different than sort of what you're talking about with we're having a great conversation and I want to communicate that if we were to continue, I would be amenable.
I think Ryan used the term coquettishness before we had come out here, which is helpful because I think flirtatious has come into English meaning cutesy. Maybe at Bethlehem it has negative connotations or something, I don't know. But coquettish, that sort of constantly vying for attention, that's
Right.
not a disposition
That-
we want to adopt
Right.
in seeking.
All right, we're almost out of time, so I want to ask maybe one or two more questions. So one would be this. So now we're in a dating relationship here, and here at Bethlehem, complementarians, we embrace a husband's headship in marriage. Does that same kind of headship show up in dating or engagement? So must a woman who's dating a guy or engaged to a guy, is she to submit to him? Is he to have some kind of authority over her?
I would say it very clearly, absolutely not.
Okay.
I think that a woman in a dating relationship should think about her being under the authority of her church and her elders, under her parents, if her parents are in that kind of realm. But there's not a covenant relationship in dating that implies that kind of authority of a man over a woman prior to marriage. So I mean, I think that authority in terms of shepherding in that sense comes through the mutual commitment to one another in essentially in marriage, right?
Right.
Betrothal is what I was thinking of. But
And so the issue there is that a wife should submit to her own husband. That's not her husband. Therefore, she shouldn't submit
right.
herself to him.
that's right.
Which is really important, particularly in the dating and the engagement relationship, because once that woman comes before God in the congregation and says, yes, I make this person my covenant head, she's at that point said, I'm going to submit to him forever. And so before that, if she's suddenly duped into thinking she has to submit early, then she has no capacity to say, I've been getting to know you, and this is not going to lead me in faithfulness toward you and toward Christ. This is not good. If she thinks somehow she's bound to his authority, she feels like she can't say no or wait or stop or we need to. She suddenly feels like she has to keep going down this road she's committed to, but it's not that kind of covenantal relationship. In fact, that's what dating and engagement are for, or dating in particular, up until that moment when you say, no, or stay away, or that's the woman has a no and a yes, and she should feel free to use her no, even if the gentleman is saddened. They've been dating for 4 weeks or 6 months or 2 years, and no is good
hard.
and healthy and hard.
You said it much more helpfully than I did, but I'm thinking in the context of the potential for abuse, which can happen in dating relationships where a man takes on an untoward kind of authority in that sense. But yeah, I like the way that you.
Well, so we've, this is unintentional on my part, but it works. We've moved from friendship to, how do we get into dating relationships? Now we've been into dating relationships, and now it's time to break up. Is it? So here's the question. Is it ever okay to appeal to sort of the will of God as a reason for a breakup? In other words, like, why? So I don't think we should see each other anymore. Why not? Because God doesn't want us to. Is that a helpful appeal to make on either part, the guy or the girl? Doesn't matter. Like, is that a helpful rationale to use, or is that maybe not the best one?
No.
Not a good rationale.
Well, here's how Scripture talks about it. Here is the will of God for you, your sanctification. It isn't, here's the will of God for you, we shall no longer date. Like that's not how Scripture talks about the will of God and how it uses it. So don't use it that way.
Yeah, I would say though in 1 Thessalonians 4, right, where you're coming from, right, the particular charge that Paul's giving the Thessalonians is to avoid sexual immorality, right? So if there's sexual immorality in your relationship, absolutely, that would be a place where it is the will of God for us to break up, right? Or for things to not continue the way that they are, we need to go talk to somebody, we need to get help, we need to not be sinning against God, right? I mean, that's the thing in 1 Thessalonians 4 that's especially serious, right, is Paul says that God is an avenger in all of these things. Like, we should take this seriously. So in that sense, if there's sexual immorality, if there's some kind of pattern of sinfulness that is unrepentant and continuing, it is God's will for you to not continue in that way. But in terms of breaking up with somebody and saying, I think that this is God's will, I mean, that could be the burrito that you had for dinner last night or something like that.
I hate it when my burritos do that. Those kind of
subjective impressions, not based on...
Well, it's the danger, right? So what you mean is, I'm not interested, and I don't think this is a wise direction, or I'm not there. And by appealing to the will of God, you're trying to give your decision some kind of divine stamp, which to the other person can be harmful, because there must be something wrong with me if God doesn't think that we should be together.
Or in not having the courage to actually
give the real reason, right? That this just isn't a fruitful election. All right. Well, we're out of time, and this one ended in a breakup. So maybe we'll have a different forum at some point, and then we can actually get to a marriage. But thank you guys for the questions. I know we didn't get to all of them. I have a couple of announcements. First, let's thank these guys for being willing to do this.